All right, welcome to Halitics. So glad to be talking to you today. It is April 1st. We're in spring. It's pretty exciting. I was off just 1 week, Arlen. I guess it feels a little bit longer to you. We did do a program 2 weeks ago, but I was on all week following that live stream on Monday, whatever it was, the 17th, I would suppose, or 18th of March. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well. The weather here is good. We got sunshine outside, and I'm happy for that. And yeah, we had a little bit of a holiday weekend for those who are into Easter and all that. And today is, of course, yesterday also was transgender identity day or something like that, which a lot of
Wow, I didn't
right-wingers
know that there was such a day. That's interesting. That's a new one on me.
Yeah, and the right wing just really went to town on it. How could they do that during Easter Day? They blamed Biden for it, even though it had actually come about in 2009. So he had really nothing to do with starting it. So, but
I guess in San Francisco, what do they have? Like maybe they have some parades or something. That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that day. And you know what I'd like to see us on the left do? Let's have and we do have a Labor Day, but let's push a working person's day or some sort of, class-based holiday because, if trans folks want to have their own day, that's fine. But I think to win elections, what we need is to unify poor, struggling, and working people. And this type of holiday, there's poor trans people, there's working class trans people, there are very rich trans people like Bruce, Caitlyn Jenner. So to me, this is a holiday that is going to divide folks that we want to unify in a class-based revolution. So
I agree, Hal. I agree. I think identity politics is hurting the Democrats, and it's costing them. And it'd be better if we kind of got together, like you say, and emphasize working class people and middle class rather than different races, ethnicities, gender, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I'm not trying to diminish or ignore the problems the challenges that people face if they're not in what's considered the majority or not considered, their actions, their behaviors, whatever you want to call it, their identities are outside what has been a traditional norm. I get it. Those folks have real issues. Those are real challenges. I'm not ignoring them. But if we really want to help those folks be totally accepted, I think we need to, first of all, unite voters in support of an economic justice agenda. You brought to our attention, we'll get to it a little bit later in the program, we've got a lot to talk about, but how unequal America is. And I think that is part of the reason for all the division that we're seeing between groups that otherwise might be able to unify.
Yeah, and it's growing wider and wider, all the time. According to Tom Hartman's article, the wealth of American 1% hit a record $44 trillion. And, the wealth of the top 0.1% has almost doubled. So you can see the direction it's going. It's going to continue with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. And it's not a good thing for the country.
It's awful. It's absolutely awful, Arlen. I was actually in Mexico. I mentioned that beforehand, and there's a lot of poverty there, but it's less unequal, and it may well be that people there are happier because they don't feel that they're being quite as exploited. They're not quite as they're not measuring themselves, constantly comparing themselves against people who are extraordinarily rich. A, and B, they're not in constant fear of falling into some horrible pit. Now, Mexico's got a lot of really serious problems. I don't want to hold it up as some kind of exemplar, but it really tells you where we are as a society that, a second world country, as it's sometimes referred to in many ways, is able to somehow figure out a way to afford, maybe to provide enough to more people in its country than we are able to provide here.
At least where you were, perhaps, I don't know, but encompasses the whole country. But just recently, we have talked about it. There was a list of the world's happiest countries, and we've fallen out of the top 20, and that's certainly not a good sign.
Yeah, inequality makes people really upset. I mean, there's just no question about it. Hey, let's get to it. So I mentioned, Arlen, I was in, and we will talk about all these topics. We're going to, well, we got just a little bit about Mexico. I mentioned to you, Arlen, I was thinking a lot about you, and I said off the air I had a little gift for you. I may not be able to deliver him. I think you can see the picture there somewhat, camouflage there. And I say him, I don't know. This may have been a female, but the croc there, and you see the croc there was not on an egg nest, right? So if it's a she didn't have her eggs underneath her or nearby, as far as I could tell. But look at those teeth, huh? Those are pretty scary looking, huh?
Well, that's what you're going to send me, an alligator for a pet?
Well, it wouldn't be an alligator. Now get your reptiles straight,
sorry.
Arlen. This is actually a croc.
Wow.
And I want to point out to you, that thing is, I actually swam in a pool. They call them cenotes where I was. It's like a spring. And very stupidly, that croc was basking, the croc wasn't stupid, I was stupid. There were a bunch of folks in that cenote, and the croc looked like it was totally phased. It wasn't paying us any attention. They can move very quickly, shouldn't have gotten in the water. I actually now regret it. But the croc did not move while I was, basically I just quickly side-stroked across, staying as close as I could to the pool side away from it where I could jump out. But, they can swim very quickly. They can jump into water quickly. You can see the tail. Can you see the tail kind of in the back there?
Yeah.
How long that thing is? And that's not even a full grown by any means.
Look at that mouth. Look at those teeth.
I know, right? So when we saw it, it was sleep. It wasn't necessarily sleeping. Its eye was open, but it was basking with its mouth closed. And at some point, it did open that mouth, but it never did anything beyond that. So
when you
did not attack.
When you got out of the water, did you count your limbs? Did you count your fingers and toes? And everything was intact, I hope.
Yeah, the teeth are very sharp, which is, I think, another way you can tell it's not that old, because the older crocs, which are also bigger, they've been out in the pools and chomping down on birds if they can catch them, fish. If the mammal comes, like they have a lot of little raccoons there. They're not like American. They're smaller raccoons. They eat them. They don't eat the jaguars, as far as I can tell, but pretty much the flamingos. So they've been chomping on those animals for 20, 25 years. Their teeth start to get a little bit worn down, and they're not so sharp. So I think that
there's
tells us
a lot of those teeth. Looks like a little younger. Long row.
So as I mentioned, Arlen, that reptile, I believe, will be delivered to your home in, I think Coach used to call you the mayor of Delray Oaks. You won't be able to take it to, if you want, I'll have it examined to see if it is a female with egg-laying capacity. You won't be able to bring it to Vermont. It's too cold for a crocodile. But I think it should do all right in Monterey.
Well, it depends. I don't know if they have laws or rules against alligators. I'm sure there's certain animals that.
Well, again, Arlen, croc. It's a croc, please. Sorry. Not going to like being referred to as a gator. All right. For those who thought, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sure they wouldn't, allow me to have lions or tigers or, that kind of thing. And I think a croc also might be on that list.
And you know what? I just want to, and anyone who thought I was serious, there it is. No, there's no crocodile on its way to Arlen's, but it was a thought. It was a thought. All right, real quick. So, I've been struggling, Arlen. I mentioned this to you, hoping to get more viewers. It hasn't been easy, and I'm disappointed. I think they do a really good show. I thought things were going to blow up. But I will, just a little bit of good news. This is not, by the way, this is not an April Fool's. I was somewhat, I won't say too heartened, but I was somewhat heartened that I think you can see this. Let me make sure I get it so it's clear and easy for viewers. I don't think I mentioned this. This had been kind of a reduced goal. I've kind of tamped down my goals, but you can see it there. we have hit the magic 200 subscribers list. And I think I got that just before I started my week off, my break there. So that was a nice little, a little boost, put a little wind in my sails, if you will. It's nice to see.
Congratulations. Let's shoot for 300 soon.
Get to 5. We get to 500, or I'm going to really push folks. Please, please, please subscribe. We get to 500. I mentioned this. I actually will be able to monetize this. The YouTube, Google corporation, monolith, behemoth, whatever term you want to use for it, monopoly, will actually start sending me checks. And what I understand is, folks,
I will assume, Hal, that I will get a salary then.
I'll give you 10% of my first check, which, from what I understand, what others are getting when they get to that point, when they first start to monetize, that 10% could be a full, a peso or two, pesos being worth 6 cents.
I don't know if I could use a peso here in Monterey, but I could always just go south of the border and use it.
You could, and you could get about as far with it in Mexico as you could, as the 6 cents would take you here. The early checks are just absolutely de minimis. I mean, there's just nothing to it.
It's a tough business, Al. I don't have to tell you that.
It would be nice, though. It would be vindicating for me. Let's get to the topics, unless you have any. We'll just, you know what, I'm not even going to ask you, Arlen. Terrible tragedy while I was away. And very close to where I live I live in Kensington, Maryland. This happened in Baltimore. And you mentioned the ramifications still with us. Let me start with the video of the Baltimore tragedy. You were saying, Arlen, though, that it's still closed. What's your news? What's your latest information? I have some too, which I'll share, but I was curious what your information is about what's happening here with respect to this terrible situation.
Well, I know, of course, they have to recover the bodies. I don't know that they have yet, but they're also moving to open it up enough so that some ships can go through and, and start getting, some of the normal ships and all that through. And, actually making the bridge so the cars can go across. I don't know how long that's going to take, but,
it's just awful. It's an international story, obviously. Here's a video. Folks may have seen it, but I'd like to just show it again. As I understand it, there's only emergency ships can get through. There's no business going through in that port right now. It's just if they have to get, for repairs or some other reason, they've got to get, and also the salvage company, the salvage ships and the ships that are working on the port are the only ones who can get in and out of the port of Baltimore. It's an absolute transportation disaster, as well as a human one. You mentioned 6 dead, as I understand it, 8 who were precipitated into the water, 2 survived. Here's a video from AP. I thought they did a nice job setting the table, so we'll see if we can play it for you.
The Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed overnight when a container ship leaving the port of Baltimore lost power and crashed into one of the columns supporting the bridge, causing... And
I'm going to just stop it there because this is really an amazing image, and I want to see if I can get it full screen for folks. But yeah, that very, very large, enormous, if you will, container ship, Arlen, and it just took out that bridge. So I'm going to see if I can get the full screen. This is a pretty amazing video. Somehow, and I don't know quite why, our friends at AP used this TikTok video. Maybe that was the only one, but here we go.
The entire thing to come down into the water.
So do you see that, Arlen? You see the bridge collapse. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, the first thing I thought of was... First thing I noticed was that the entire bridge collapsed, not just a part of it, but the whole thing. I don't know why they make them that way. You'd think they'd section them off somewhat, but of course I don't know anything about building bridges.
It's a really interesting question, and there were some issues. The bridge was not protected, so the stanchion or whatever, the support that's coming out of the river, the Patapsco River there, a lot of times you'll see like giant rubber, things that surround them and cushions, like maybe a lot of tires. They'll wrap something that's, pretty darn big and strong and secure, or just reinforce it with bricks, something. But this really was just a naked pillar that this enormous ship that larger than 3 football fields in terms of length and going fast, 9 miles per hour with an incredible amount of torque. Torque is twisting force, but it was twisting to a degree because it had lost power, but just a tremendous amount of weight and mass. And also velocity. So we'll see if we can get some more of this.
On the bridge at the time of the collapse. Of them, 2 have been rescued from the water, and the other 6 we believe are unaccounted for. Authorities did say they were able to stop traffic to the bridge when they received notification about the ship losing power, and so they believe that likely saved many lives. They haven't given.
It's like a toy set, really, the way it looks. Just
but
all broken up.
But the good news was that they were able to stop the cars from going across the bridge. Otherwise, it could have been a much worse tragedy.
Yeah, it happened about 2 a.m., I believe, so there wasn't much traffic. It's really a bridge only used, I think, by folks in the city itself. People like myself, if we're traveling through Baltimore, use the tunnels rather than the bridge. But a lot of traffic on that bridge, not at 2 a.m. There were cars that were precipitated into the water, but I believe they were already on the bridge. They were cars of the folks, the workers, the construction workers who had been on the bridge at the moment doing maintenance.
They also may be from Central America too, or Mexico, El Salvador.
Exactly. That's who we commission now to do dangerous late night work that's low paid, is not American citizens. So another example of that inequality, Arlen, that we mentioned. So I'm going to just finish this video off, and I want to get into some of the
how many or whether there actually were vehicles on the bridge when it collapsed.
And there's the size of that, and you can see the containers on it, Arlen, as well. We'll talk about, I don't believe that ship was an automotive transport ship, but, and this will become relevant, Baltimore is apparently the American port that has the largest amount of automotive shipping. So cars are actually brought into this country from Asia, from Europe, through the port of Baltimore. Sometimes the entire vehicle, sometimes you'll have different automotive parts brought into the port in those containers. And also we do export some vehicles. We don't export as many as we import, but we do export from there as well. So automotive is, the automotive industry uses the port quite a bit to ship goods, and mostly to import, not exclusively imports, but mostly imports.
The Port of Baltimore is closed. It is a major shipping port on the East Coast. The bridge, of course, also remains closed, which will inevitably cause traffic problems in the area. But for the moment, authorities say they are focusing on the search and rescue efforts to try to find anyone who might be still in the water.
All right, so that's the video. And yeah, that was an early, that was within a day or two. They got 2 folks they saved. Terrible.
I think there'll be an investigation, and a lot of questions will come about the ship. How did it happen that they had so much trouble? So they'll go through the repair records and all that, and just see if the ship company owes some responsibility for that.
It's hard to believe they don't. I was surprised and disappointed that they weren't required to post some sort of a bond. Biden has already announced that the United States is going to front the money So a big, and we'll try to get it back. I mean, it's not like they're saying we're going to pay for it. The U.S. taxpayer's not necessarily on the hook and probably won't be. But still, it's a lot of money that has to be laid out. There you can see it, a 300-meter long ship going about 9 miles per hour. It had lost power, absolute unmitigated disaster. And I want to talk, well, ways that this could have been avoided, because that's really important. We'll show, we'll get to that in just a minute, but there you go. And I was surprised why Biden said this, but I think this is a somewhat misrepresentation. We're not, well, here, or let me see. Can you read that? And I'll put it better. But Biden said he expects to pick up. So is that your understanding? Isn't it your understanding he's going to pay it up front, but we'll get the money back, right?
Yeah, you're a lot closer to it than I am, so I don't know all those details.
$60 million in emergency aid, but this could be, I think, $1 billion cost at least. It's extraordinary. And as you can see, the governor here, my governor, Wes Moore, saying this is a very long road. Probably could take, I don't know, 6 months to a year before they get that bridge fixed, among other things. The port opened. There are 2,500 port workers. You cannot minimize this tragedy. And I think there's a lot of blame that we should be talking about. The first thing, okay, 15,000, just want to get to the cost. We'll get into the blame, but 15,000 workers idle. That's very serious for the economy of this area. Baltimore is a real blue-collar city. It is not like New York or San Francisco with lots of office workers. Obviously, there are some. But these 15,000 workers being idled is just going to ripple right through the economy.
I don't know if you're aware, Hal, but there was a lot of conspiracy theories that developed out of this right after the bridge collapsed. A lot of the people on, MAGA people were talking about all kinds of, blaming Biden and blaming, so many things, and making it sound just ridiculously crazy. But it was basically just a ship hit a bridge, and that's the problem.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But my son posted an interesting tweet from the bridge itself that apparently had been sent out a few hours before this, where the bridge claimed that it had dirt on Hillary Clinton. So I thought to myself, well, that might explain everything, right? I mean, maybe there's some... Could the Clintons be involved, Arlen, I guess is the question. Do you see
sure
that?
A lot of people would be very eager to accept that scenario. Nowadays, conspiracy theories are just all over the place, and people will believe a lot of them. And of course, Hillary Clinton is one of the major targets.
Well, you're watching Halitics. Arlen is joining me, and a little bit of a subdued show. I think I got a bit of a break, Arlen, and it maybe took a little bit of the edge off. But don't worry, it'll come back. It'll come back. The edge, I mean, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will be back. And there were some news that I heard that was, just keeping abreast of news to the extent I was in Mexico. It's just bad stuff, right? I mean, you just look through it. I mean, there's not a lot to be happy about, Arlen.
No. And of course it is an election year, and it's going to be probably for sure the dirtiest election that we've ever had, because you've got somebody like Trump, and all the MAGA people are going to, put out all kinds of crazy things. And hopefully, the Biden people will not go that route, and we'll go more normal.
Well, we're already, I saw an article in the New York Times that strongly implies, without actually saying it, that the Chinese are trying to, I don't know, push the election towards Trump, which to me is ridiculous. The Chinese don't want Trump to win. Trump is the one who's talking about imposing high tariffs and hurting the Chinese economy. He's said China's the bigger threat not Russia. So I think this is clearly some kind of propaganda effort, if not by the Biden team, but maybe even the New York Times, or is falling for something. But Arlen, you don't have to respond to that. You can, but here's the tweet I was talking about from the bridge itself. I have information that could lead to the arrest and imprisonment of Hillary Clinton. And that was, look at the timing too, Arlen, 2:20 a.m., just about, I guess I thought it was about an hour, maybe a few minutes before the bridge was hit. Do you think this could be the smoking gun that we've all been looking for to figure out what caused this crash?
Well, I've never heard of bridges having their own, posting things like that, but this one is, Francis Scott Key Bridge, so there might be something to it.
Well, do you see that? I mean, it seems legit to me. It's as believable as anything else you'll find on.
Hey, if it involves Hillary Clinton, anything is possible.
I'm going to say as much as I am always ready to blame Hillary Clinton for everything. Oh, and we've got the wrong thing. Is for everything. I'm not going to say she's responsible here. Just a few more thoughts. So we mentioned the unemployment, the many, probably minimum of hundreds of millions of dollars costs. I also do want to, Arlen, talk about the environmental. I don't know, did you hear this or see this, that, there's an oil slick. The container ship had a lot of hazardous petroleum-based products on it, and some of the containers that fell into the bay were damaged, and the oil and the slick, has befouled the river there.
Well, yeah, that's all you need is something like that. I mean, it's bad enough that the bridge collapses and all the commuters are going to be, having a tough time for the next few months. So, but yeah, the oil slick, I'm not surprised.
No, and we got a picture of that too. The Washington Post. I mean, this is the kind of story I think the media does very, very well. It's a tragedy. It's not overtly political, right? So they don't feel like they have to play both sides. They have to give he said, she said. They just kind of try to give you the facts. So I've been reading the Baltimore Sun. I've been reading the Washington Post. Obviously, those two cities close. Baltimore's where it happened. But USA Today doing a nice job, AP. Here you go. Sheen in the water. Recovery work runs the risk of stirring up toxic sediments. And they accompanied it with a good image, Arlen, where you can see it. I actually used it for this, my thing. So you can see there the little oil slicks. Do you see them there, Arlen, in that picture? Yeah, I don't know how well that comes through. So
I would imagine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would imagine by now that we have some good techniques to, clear up things like oil spills and so on. And we've had so many over the years, and I think they probably developed some good ways of dealing with it. But still, it's bad no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I hope you're right. Some things to think about to maybe hope this won't happen again from USA Today. What could have possibly prevented the tragedy? Well, tugboats. I was thinking about this. 60 years ago, people would take ships across the ocean instead of flying. I mean, there was jet flights, but the QE2, the Queen Mary were ships that people would take, and they would be guided out of New York Harbor or wherever they were going by these tugboats on all sides.
Yeah,
because they were so big and long, and they weren't even as big as this container ship. So you had a number of tugboat captains who knew the port like the back of their hand, and that was really good. In this case, you had one pilot piloting an enormous 3 football field long ship, who may well not have known the port very well, lost power, was almost certainly going too fast. I question why you have a ship that big with that much weight in a city port like that. There are many, many questions to ask, but we don't use these tugboats, so there you go.
I don't know how a tugboat would have prevented it, but
Well, the tugs are on all sides of it, so they're kind of nudging the ship along, and they're connected to the ship. They don't necessarily touch the ship. They could be, but they generally have these guy wires. You might have 2 or 3 tugs on each side of the ship, plus the cables. So they would be nudging the ship the whole time, and they're not going to lose power. A major factor here was that the pilot of the container ship lost power in his ship, and it went dark. But if that happens, it's not an issue if you have tugboats that are guiding it, nudging it through in the correct, into the away from the bridge.
Well, if the
makes
tugboats
sense.
are big enough and strong enough, I suppose that's true. I just don't know how big the tugboats would have to be with that big of a ship.
Well, you'd need a lot of them. I don't know that it's necessarily how big and strong each one is, but are there enough? I wanted to also just get to this, or I know there's other stories we want to get to. I don't want to kill the whole show on this, but it's such a big story, and it's especially here, and I didn't get a chance to talk about it. But I wanted to bring this up, and also because I know I'm going to, at some point, tweak you a little bit about politics. You know I can't help it. But here you go. Big issue with the automotive industry, as I mentioned. Auto companies have to figure out port deliveries, and that's because Baltimore is a major site, a major import spot for cars from all over the world that are being, delivered to dealerships in the United States. And you can see it. The Port of Baltimore handles more cars and light trucks than any other port in the U.S. Clearing the debris could take months. That is both importing and export, mostly imports. Again, we import more cars, and Baltimore handles more imports, but both. By the way, let me just quickly tell folks again, please, if you can, don't forget, click that subscribe button. Don't want to forget. So here's the politics. Arlen, in terms of imports, former President Trump has called for tariffs. And I would say that if we had high tariffs, this might not have happened, or might not have been nearly as serious. Remember, those were all those containers with all those imports. Here, let's play Trump, and I'll get your reaction, and then I'll talk a little bit about this as well.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it.
All right, so there he is. That's the famous bloodbath quote. And I think both sides are kind of misrepresenting a little bit. I mean, some on the left are saying, or on the Democratic side are saying, he's threatening revolution, a bloody, violent revolution. His supporters are saying, no, he's just talking about the automotive industry. I don't think it's quite so clear either way. I won't say, I'm not going to accuse him of trying to foment revolution by that statement, but I'm also not going to say it's completely absurd to draw that conclusion, Arlen, because you know me, I'm sort of in the middle.
That's very typical of the way he talks, as we know. And to say a bloodbath concerning the auto industry doesn't make any sense. So, a lot of the people on his side took that route, but it just doesn't make sense.
Well, it does make sense. I mean, he's saying we're losing market share, even in the United States, to foreign vehicles, and that's why I want to put 100% tariff. Wouldn't that, if it were in place, possibly reduce the likelihood of this tragedy? You only need 3 football length container ships if you're importing enormous billions and billions of dollars worth of goods from foreign ports. If we had a domestic manufacturing industry, then we wouldn't need to import all those things.
And one thing with Trump, he always says, if this bad thing wouldn't have happened if I was the leader, or if I was the leader, we would have won this war. And, he's always giving himself credit for.
Oh, he's bombastic. And of course he's bombastic and he's absurd. And, the blame for the East Palestine crash is arguably on him, because he did reduce the requirements, the safety precautions that that trains had to take when they were traveling. So, that's something that people have argued, and then there's a back and forth on that. Trump is full of it all the time. But that said, can you at least grudgingly concede that having tariffs, high tariffs that really provide a significant barrier to entry would likely reduce the chances of something like this happening?
That's pretty complicated. I couldn't say for sure. It would have an influence, but exactly how, I'm not sure.
Well, let me throw this one at you. If we had those high tariffs and we were still bringing in all those goods, wouldn't we then at least have the resources right there available to us to address this kind of a very, very costly, very, very expensive collision? Because right now, we're running huge deficits. Biden had to raise the debt ceiling and have, horse trade with the Republicans. Nobody on the left, at least, was happy with the concessions that he made to people like Joe Manchin to get their votes. So wouldn't at least getting the tariff money from the importers be a cushion, provide a cushion to pay for this type of tragedy?
Yeah, that's conceivable. Certainly, free trade hasn't done well for the American worker. We've lost a lot of good jobs, and it hasn't worked out well. So I think a certain amount of tariffs are probably appropriate.
I really appreciate your saying that, Arlen, and I think it's important for people on the left to understand that this is part of Trump's appeal. Is he is talking about an issue that it's not racism, it's not bashing some group. He's just simply saying we're losing jobs. We're having our lunch eaten by foreign manufacturers. Let's do something about it.
We were certainly told that by Ross Perot, and he was right all along. That we're going to lose tons of jobs, and didn't do him any good, but he was correct.
All right. Before we move to your topic, do you have anything else you want to say about the bridge? I've made my points, and I got nothing else.
Well, it's not anywhere near me, so it won't affect me directly, but and it's probably not going to affect you. You said you don't really make use of it. So I just feel bad for the commuters who are going to have to find a new way to get to work.
Yeah, the commuters, that's a very good point. And the unemployed, the 15,000 workers now at the port who are going to now need government assistance, which is being promised. And don't forget, there are a lot of, lunch rooms and associated businesses at the port that depend on those workers as well. So it's economically an absolute disaster.
Sure.
This was a story you wanted to discuss. This is from the New York Times. Ethan Crumbley's parents were just part of a much bigger problem. So do you want to talk about this? This is a gun issue where Ethan Crumbley, a high school student, took a gun to school and killed a number of his classmates, I believe.
Well, it's just that this country has gotten to the point where guns are almost a fetish. People feel like they're the number one, barrier to freedom. And, there's more and more states are making open carry fine. And, we've got to get some common sense gun laws. I mean, there's no question about it. There's way too many killings by guns in our country. And we should, be at least sensible enough to make the kind of, legislation and regulations like we do with cars, because guns are, I think, a lot more dangerous than cars.
May not be more deaths that result from guns in this country than from automobiles. I know in the past, automobiles have been the number one cause of death. Of course, so many, most times people get in their car and everything goes fine and there's no problem. That isn't the case when people pull out their handguns. Not at all. So no, I'm with you on this, Arlen. This is an issue. As much as I tend to be critical of the Democrats, I don't really see them to blame. This seems to me the Republicans have really managed to stymie any even, very, very popular laws, like just simply no gun show loophole for background checks, for example. No more of those kind of magazines, right, where you can, semi-automatic magazines. All of that, we still have those problems because it seems like the Republican Congress will not allow for any limitations.
And the interesting thing about that,
guns.
Hal, is that the average Republican is actually in favor of a lot of those regulations. But
right.
It's all about donations from the, NRA and the gun manufacturers. That's what, makes the Republicans just want to, prevent any kind of gun control.
Yeah, it's the money. This is what we see. Well, look, most Americans, most surveys say want Medicare for all, but we don't have it because of all the money that the for-profit healthcare industry pours into the coffers of politicians on both sides of the aisle. And certainly the same is true of the gun manufacturers. It's terrible. I mean, I don't know. I wish people would vote, though. See, what frustrates me is so many voters will say, "Well, I agree. We should close the gun show loophole." Like you have a lot of voters in Texas who say we should close the gun show loophole. They're still going to vote for Ted Cruz for Senate this year.
Yeah, every problem you could think of that has to do with the amount of money involved. Whether it's the cost of drugs, healthcare, you name it, it's big, it's a big problem. So, the average person does not get what they want in this country, and that's
Arlen, this article shows that the parents of Ethan Crumbley, who murdered 4 of his fellow mates at school, are actually going to jail themselves, convicted of involuntary manslaughter. What's your thought? How did that was news to me. That was quite a surprise. Where do you come down on that?
Well, yeah, that is unusual, but they just went completely the wrong route. There were so many signs that he had mental problems, and they didn't take that into consideration. He was having tremendous problems at home. They didn't lock their guns up properly. They gave him guns as a present. I mean, they did everything possibly wrong that they could do, and they should have been more aware of what they were doing. So they probably deserve to be in jail.
You think this will hold up on appeal? I don't see why not, right? I mean, they clearly showed reckless or depraved indifference to human life. So
No question.
I guess the argument might be, if I was their lawyer, I would say, who's the victim? I mean, yes, those 4 people were killed, but we didn't intend. We had no, but it doesn't matter, right? You can't put someone who's drunk behind the wheel of an automobile and say, well, I didn't know they were going to kill anybody. No, but you put them in a position where you could reasonably anticipate it. I don't see any way they're not going to have to serve that sentence. Do you think this will have an impact? Do you think that the conviction might cause others who would have similar views to this family in terms of guns to maybe be a little more careful when it comes to purchasing a weapon for their child?
I think this family is just so extreme in all the wrong moves that they made. I think most people under those circumstances would not have to go to jail, that they would be considered innocent if they didn't do anything, outrageous. Because you never know. The kids, you have a kid, you just never know what they're going to do for sure. So it's difficult.
Well, I didn't make a lot of slides from that story because I thought you'd have some insights. But one thing I wanted to just note was the author describes growing up in a gun-owning family and a hunting family, but notes somewhat ironically that the only way you can really be sure your kid, even if you have a gun locker, even if you do everything you can to keep the gun out of the hands of your kids, the only way you can be sure that your child will not take your gun and use it to kill somebody or to shoot somebody is not to have one.
Yeah. And also you have problem. The culture in this country has gotten kind of extreme. Guns are almost a fetish in a lot of places. They think that's the most important thing in the world. It's the most important freedom that the government might take away. They take away their guns. We've just gotten to the point where we just put too much emphasis, too much importance on owning a gun. And and like I say, it's almost like a fetish for a lot of people in this country.
Arlen, does the fact that the prosecutor made the decision to actually charge the parents and they were convicted by a jury of their peers, does that give you some measure of optimism that this may be a way to address the problem effectively?
Well, I'm glad in this case that the prosecutors did the right thing. I don't know if it's going to carry over to anybody else. There's a whole lot of other things that we should be doing to prevent this kind of gun violence, and there's just a lot of different common sense rules, like you say, that the public is generally in favor of, but are really tough to pass in Congress.
All right, folks, if you're wondering why I was looking off to the side, I'm listening rapidly to Arlen, but I just want to make sure that we didn't have any calls, make sure I had the phone line set up correctly. If you do want to join us, I've had the number up there. It's up there now, 240-242-5646. For Halitics, would love to talk to you. We got about 15 more minutes left. And another story, Arlen, you brought to my attention. I hope this is the right Hartman story. It's from actually February of this year. I didn't find one more recent. You noted it was on Substack. This is from his Substack, I believe. So Tom Hartman, How the Richest Democracy in the World Abandons Americans. And you talked specifically, or want to focus specifically on inequality, and that is the headline here from Hartman.
Well, yeah, Tom's talked about that a lot. My particular copy says March 30th, but he's written about it, many times over the years, and he understands and recognizes that the inequality in this country is worse than it's ever been, and probably among the worst in the world, and it's it hurts a lot of people, and a lot of people are affected by it. And there's just way too many people who are homeless, who have trouble eating, and it never used to be that way, but as these extremes of inequality continue, it's gotten worse. I mean,
no question. I don't think this is unrelated to the story you mentioned we were just talking about, the gun owning culture and the fetishization. As people fear, right? I mean, you may not be poor yourself, but you may fear it. You may have real legitimate concerns that you yourself could become poor. You're losing power. You're losing influence. So you grab onto anything, and that gun makes you feel like you've got some autonomy, some agency over your life. You don't really, and if you try to use that gun, as many do, they usually wind up themselves, 6 feet under, or else in jail for the rest of their lives. But I guess for that moment gives you a sort of a jolt of power and influence that you otherwise may not feel.
And you could probably spread that over to Donald Trump too. He's kind of that way too. He's like a magic person that could, make these problems go away, just like people feel that guns can make the problems go away. Even though he has nothing really. He doesn't have any good policies. He just
we just said he has a good policy on tariffs, so there is that. And that addresses the issue for many working class people. We talk about states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, which have a gun owning culture, a hunting culture, and it often curdles because of economic insecurity, economic fears for themselves or their family. So, I'm always going to come back and take issue with the Trump is the Satan that the Democratic establishment pushes.
I don't know if you noticed, Hal, but over the weekend he was tweeting like crazy on his social media site and coming up with all kinds of crazy things. He had a picture of Joe Biden tied up in a truck.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I didn't see that though. No.
Of course, he's got this crazy thing about selling Bibles. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but that was absolutely absurd. And Saturday Night Live did a good imitation of that.
I miss talking to you about this, Arlen. When you talk about stuff like this, and I've been looking at all the polling, I do not, I've kind of gone back and forth. I don't think he's going to win. I know that a lot of people say he's got the advantage and he's winning in the swing states. Maybe that's all true. He's got like a 1-point advantage. I step back. There was one poll that really made me think Trump might win this thing, was this Ann Selzer poll. I think we talked about that. She's from Iowa. She's known as the best poller in America, according to 538. She had Trump up by 5 or 7 or something in some poll. And I thought, well, that's a poll that would worry me, that if that would really concern me. But he's not able to consolidate his lead. I think most Americans are diehard opposed to him being president. He could still win. You don't need 50% of the vote, as we know, to win. But that kind of stuff, just Biden does appear, for all his problems, for all the issues we have. He's old. I know you had some story about him being older. He's even older than Trump. Not that Trump isn't old, but that he still seems more presidential. I mean, Trump is just, he's a buffoon. He's a clown.
In many ways, Biden is lucky to have somebody like Trump to run against, because by himself, Biden does not come across as very kind of a person that people are going to get excited about and rush to the polls. So, but I think Trump is just getting crazier and crazier as time goes on. I think he's feeling the pressure, of all these trials, of all the things that are going on around him. And I think I've noticed it. I think a lot of people have noticed it, that he's starting to talk a little crazier than even he normally does. I would be surprised if he won, Arlen, for all the people saying he's going to win. By the way, we've got pundit thought leader Arlen Grossman with us. Don't forget thebigpicturereport.com, www. It's right on the screen there. I don't say it a lot because you can see it, but you can go to his website at any time. www.3Ws, thebigpicturereport.com. This is from Hartman. He goes after Ronald Reagan correctly for slashing, gutting, whatever. We're just rending the progressive income tax, which I think was one of the worst things we've seen, one of the most damaging, most harmful. One of the reasons I don't, buy that Trump is the world's worst president, because I think what Reagan did with the assistance of Congress was, we're paying the price now, 40 plus years later, for this, and we'll continue to pay it. And the entire planet is paying the price for this incredibly reckless, I will say evil policy of slashing taxes on the wealthy. It wasn't trickle down, it was gush up economics, Arlen. It still is. Trump gave some very good tax breaks to a lot of very rich people when he was in office, and a lot of these billionaires are still putting money into Trump, even though they know he's crazy, because they're looking forward to their tax cuts they know they won't get from Biden. So
I wouldn't be so sure that Joe Biden is some kind of tax hiker or is on the side of the middle class or middle income or working class taxpayer. You can see here when the 81, the first Reagan tax cut, there were several, went into effect. That was in 1981. He had just been elected. And this is from your New York Times. In a decisive victory, this was a 25% cut. The top rate was cut from 70% to 50%. The House, and you can see this was a Democratic House majority, Arlen, that gave him that tax win. So I don't see that this story redounds to the benefit or reflects well on the Democrats either.
Well, I think Biden has made a point of saying that he's not going to tax anybody who makes less than $400,000, and I'm sure he's going to stick with that. If he doesn't, then they'll really, attack him. So, yeah, he's got to get some money from somewhere, and the most logical place would be from those who are very wealthy.
Well, can you repeat what you just said? Because I didn't really understand. He's not going to raise
Well, he's been
taxes.
saying for years, and I mean, that was his campaign promise, that he's not going to raise taxes on middle class and working people. Anybody over 400,000 will not get taxed more. So that, if he went against that, that would certainly be something that people can attack, because
my point is that the Democrats are also responsible for the massive wealth and income inequality we see today, because they went along. They voted. They passed. They passed the Reagan tax cuts, and you can see right there, Biden voted for his 81 spending and tax cuts.
Well, there's no question Democrats have made a lot of terrible mistakes over the years and continue to make terrible mistakes. But right now, they just seem like a much safer choice than somebody who's so extreme like Donald Trump.
I guess. I mean, I guess that's the best argument, right? That as terrible as it was that Joe Biden voted for that bill, and I don't think he's ever said he was sorry. I don't think he's ever apologized or said he was wrong for doing it. If you remember when Barack Obama ran in 2008, he waxed poetic about the transformative nature of the Reagan presidency. So I guess you could say, well, Biden isn't as bad as Trump. I mean, all right, but, and he has talked about inequality. I give him credit for that. I really do, but I don't think that's enough. He voted for that first cut in 81, and I think he needs to come clean and say he was wrong and he's sorry. And you can see from the Center for Public Integrity here, the 4 decades of tax cuts have led to this disastrous situation that Hartman decries. By the way, Hartman never calls out, as far as I could tell. Am I wrong? Does he ever call out Biden and the other Dems who voted for those tax cuts that of which he's so critical?
I don't think that's something he makes a point of that I know of. Yeah.
Well, shouldn't he? Shouldn't he? If he's going to say this is awful, this has destroyed our country, which it has done terrible harm to our country. Shouldn't he point out that there are Democrats in power right now, today, who are responsible for what happened?
Well, I'm sure Hartman is aware that there are many Democrats who don't.
He's aware. Then shouldn't he write about it? Shouldn't he bring it up?
I don't read everything he writes.
I didn't see it. I'm asking you because I didn't see it.
Well, but he knows, Tom, nobody knows more about what's going on economically and everything else than Tom Hartman. I think
is that a good excuse, though? Is the fact that he might know that the Democrats and specifically the president right now, for whom he has consistently called on people to vote, isn't it relevant that a policy that he right now says is so bad for our country, and he's right, that the president that he wants you to vote for was actually, instrumental in helping pass that bill?
Well, of course, Joe Biden has been in office like 50 years, and he's made his mistakes. No question about that. But I think now he wouldn't, take such a dangerous position. And he realizes he's going to. The rich have to pay more of their share, and he's mentioned that, especially in the State of the Union address. He made.
I think that's true. I agree, but wouldn't it be more persuasive if Biden came clean and if wouldn't you? Let me say it this way: forget you. I would be much more inclined to listen to Tom Hartman and to vote for Joe Biden if Tom Hartman said, yeah, Biden was really bad what he did. It was really hard. It was really, he was wrong. It was a terrible thing that he did. But he's learned his lesson. And if Biden said, I learned my lesson, I was wrong. But I don't think we can even go that far and say that, because he also said he would possibly veto Medicare for all if it were passed. And he's, embraced some really retrograde legislation that Joe Manchin has pushed.
Well, of course, Biden's not going to go ahead and talk about his many mistakes over the years. You just don't do that in a campaign. But he does say the right things now, as far as I could tell. I mean, he's definitely more pro-union than any president has been up to now. He was on the picket line, and that's the first president ever to do that. So, he had, when he is talking about how the rich are getting too rich and they're not paying the taxes they should.
Yeah, he has. I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, but I just feel that, and I don't feel, I believe, whatever term you want to use, that the culpability of the Democratic Party, and specifically today's president, has been largely ignored, overlooked, elided in the rush to condemn Trump for everything.
Well, there's no question that the Democratic Party, is in trouble in a lot of ways. And if it wasn't for Trump, I think they'd be in a lot, they'd be a lot worse shape. But I think, in comparison to Trump, they look pretty good. But yeah, the Democratic Party has a lot to answer for what they've done in the past, and they're too close to the, corporate elite. And and certainly Joe Biden is not an exciting candidate. That's for sure. And he's not exciting his base.
I don't care about excitement. I just care about policy. I just care about what you do. So 81 tax top rate was cut from 70 to 50%. 86, and it was with Democratic support. 86, Reagan, top tax rate, you can see they're cut from 50% to 28%. It's gone up since then, back and forth. Clinton raised it. I actually think George W. Bush raised it, and then Clinton raised it a little bit more. Then it went back down under W. Then it went back up under Obama. And then it went back down under Trump. And then, yes, Biden pushed it back. But during the Reagan years, you saw the rate slashed and then slashed again to 28%, the largest single drop in the history of the federal income tax. That was 86. And you know who voted for that second cut? I'm sure you know. I'm sure you know who I'm going to say, Arlen, but you can see, there's two of them right there. I don't know if you can see that picture. Most Senate vote, and the daily. So there's John Kerry and Joe Biden chuckling to themselves. I don't think it had any. That picture was taken many, many years after 1986 tax reform. So it's a misleading picture at best from a right-wing online paper, this Daily Signal. But it's true. Regardless, they did vote to cut the top marginal tax rate from 50 to 28%.
Yeah, but at least they're not leading the charge. Yeah, it's Reagan and Bush and those people who are pushing for that lower tax rate.
Au contraire, Arlen, that's not the case. It wasn't true. It's true. It wasn't Kerry and Biden who pushed that bill, but you know who did introduce it or were co-sponsors? And I showed you this before, but I may not have. I didn't really highlight it. I probably should have. That wasn't really fair. But in 1986, Bill Bradley in the Senate and Dick Gephardt in the House co-sponsored that bill. And they justified it by claiming it was to wipe out abusive tax shelters. But Reagan loved it. And it absolutely led to much greater wealth and income inequality, even if a few tax shelters. The shelters often did have some salutary purpose in terms of, what you'd call maybe charitable trusts and the like, that the favorable tax rates that they received were reduced or eliminated. Probably that was on balance good, but it also led to less money being set aside by billionaires. And there really weren't billionaires. There were just a few at that point. The number of billionaires has grown exponentially because of these tax cuts on rich people. But
I think the problem with the Democrats, when you come right down to it, is that they only are elected to office based on donations from rich people, because our system of politics is so emphasizes money and allows money to to buy elections. And until you change that, I don't know if you're going to really change a lot in this country. We need something closer to public financing of elections if we're going to get anywhere.
Arlen, I was disappointed to see that not Joe Biden, Al Gore. I actually liked Al Gore. I thought he would have been a good president. I voted for him. I think Ralph Nader did a terrible disservice to our nation. I think he betrayed us, frankly. I actually like John Kerry too. But when I saw this, I was very disappointed and made me question my, how well I judged people back then. And maybe I was too easy on Gore and Kerry as well. Biden, again, also. And also even Ted Kennedy voted for that bill.
Yeah,
So,
there's certainly no perfect Democrats out there for sure. They've made a lot of mistakes and continue to do that. But again, I think it's our system of government that is the main problem.
Arlen, that's going to do it for me for my slides that I helped. I appreciate you very much helping me put those together with your suggestions. Great stories. Anything else you want to promote or just touch on before we call it a day, and we'll return a week from today. Probably at an earlier time. We went at 4 because I didn't get in until 12:30. I landed at 12:30 a.m. at Dulles Airport last night, early this morning, and got home around 2, Arlen. So I appreciate your giving me a break there.
Well, that may be the reason we're not getting phone calls. People don't know when to find the show on live, but hopefully they'll be able to get it on.
Well, Billy Sunshine usually watches when it's later. Sometimes we get more calls or a call when it's later because some of the West Coast folks are up.
Well, somebody's going to have to let him know that it's on. Billy probably wouldn't notice otherwise.
I think he gets an email, or he may get a notification. He's really mad at me though. I'm too critical of Israel, and you're critical of that. I think he finds me too critical of Israel, and certainly of Biden as well. But your final words, if any, and then we'll come back and we'll be getting ready for the NCAA final.
I just want to make sure that when Congress gets back in session, they'll have enough money to give to Ukraine so they can defend themselves, and that there'll be much more pressure on Israel and Netanyahu to, tone down some of that awful aggression that's killing so many civilians. It's just terrible.
All right, well, we agree on the latter, not on the former. Arlen, I will see you next week. And folks, I'll see you tomorrow. Don't forget, call. Don't forget to click like. Don't forget to click subscribe.
You bet.